Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. And today, we're diving into something that I think a lot of English learners really struggle with, and that's speaking English fluently and confidently.
Yeah, it is kind of a strange thing, isn't it? You can have people that are, reading academic papers in English or,
Yeah.
watching really complicated movies and
Mhm.
understanding everything. But then when it comes to speaking,
But they hit a wall. All the
exactly.
knowledge is there, the grammar is there, but there's this disconnect between, being able to understand it and then actually produce it.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to fear of making mistakes and also just not getting enough practice speaking.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you don't get good at anything without practice.
Right,
Like
exactly.
whether it's, playing an instrument or playing a sport, you need to do it.
So we're going to dive into some specific techniques from all these different sources that we have and hopefully extract the most effective techniques for actually making progress quickly with spoken English.
That sounds great.
So the first thing, and I think this comes up in almost every single one of the sources, is the concept of immersion.
Yeah,
Now, immersion doesn't have to mean, going to an English-speaking country.
right.
It means surrounding yourself with the language as much as possible, right where you are.
Exactly.
So let's start with some real practical examples from these sources that you can do today to immerse yourself more in English.
Okay.
What about your phone, for
Oh,
example?
that's a good one. Yeah.
I mean, think about how much we use our phones.
Yeah, it's constantly there, right?
So just by switching your phone's language to English,
Oh, yeah.
and then all of a sudden, all your apps, all your, everything's in English, your social media, everything like that, that's a simple change.
Yeah, and it's kind of mimicking how we learned our first language,
Hmm.
right? I mean, when we're kids, we're just surrounded by the language all the time and we're
Mhm.
picking it up naturally.
And we're not studying it, we're just absorbing it. So
Exactly.
that's a really simple change that you can make today.
And over time that builds up, right?
Absolutely, and it leads to a much deeper understanding over time.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're not consciously focusing on it, you're still getting that exposure.
Okay, so another thing, and this is something I've actually been doing a lot lately, listening to English podcasts and audiobooks.
Oh, yeah.
I like to go on walks and just listen, and sometimes it's hard, if I'm tired and I've been working all day, it's hard to focus, but even if I'm just kind of passively listening, it's getting in there.
And that's the key, right? Consistency over time.
Yeah.
So even if you're not understanding every single word, you're still getting used to the sounds of the language.
Absolutely. And you're getting exposed to different accents and speaking styles, which is really important for comprehension.
That's so true. And I think it also helps you to develop an ear for the rhythm and the intonation of English.
Yeah, the music of the language.
Exactly.
I actually had a really interesting conversation with a polyglot the other day, and they were talking about how when they're first learning a new language, they almost treat it like learning music.
Yeah.
Just listening to it, trying to feel the rhythms and the intonation.
So rather than getting bogged down in the grammar rules, they're focusing on the sound of it.
Exactly, just like trying to get a feel for the language.
I like that approach.
All right, so we talked about phones, we talked about listening. What about movies and TV shows?
Oh, yeah, that's a classic one.
So I think in the beginning, it's helpful to watch movies with subtitles in your native language.
Yeah, just to get the general gist of what's going on.
But then once you feel a little bit more comfortable,
Yeah.
I think it's really beneficial to switch to English subtitles.
Or even no subtitles at all.
Exactly. And that forces you to really pay attention and try to understand what's being said just from the context.
Right. And you start picking up on other cues like facial expressions and body language, which are just as important as the words themselves.
Yeah, I think when you're first learning a language, you tend to focus so much on just the words, but really so much of communication is nonverbal.
Absolutely.
So watching movies and TV shows in English can really help you to develop those skills as well.
Yeah. And it can also help you to learn new vocabulary and idioms in a natural way.
Oh, yeah, because you're seeing how those words and phrases are actually used in context.
Exactly.
And it's much more memorable than just memorizing a list of words from a textbook.
And speaking of textbooks, I think there's one thing that's really important to keep in mind when you're trying to improve your spoken English, and that is to move away from thinking in your native language and translating everything in your head.
Yes.
So instead of hearing an English sentence, translating it into your native language, formulating your response in your native language, and then translating it back into English, try to think directly in English.
This is a hard one.
It is hard. It takes time and practice, but it's really the key to fluency.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the other immersion techniques we talked about can actually help with this.
How so?
Well, the more you surround yourself with English and the more you listen to it and read it, the more natural it will become to start thinking in English.
That makes sense. The more you're exposed to it, the easier it becomes.
Exactly. And when you can start thinking in English, you'll find that you can speak much more fluently and naturally.
So it's like building a new pathway in your brain,
Yeah, exactly. And the more you use that pathway, the stronger it gets.
and the easier it becomes to access.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about immersion and how important it is for improving your spoken English, but there's one crucial element that we haven't touched on yet, and that is actually speaking.
Right? Immersion is great for getting comfortable with the language, but you have to actually use it to really improve.
And the more you use it, the better you'll get.
It's like any skill. The more you practice, the more you develop it.
So let's talk about some specific techniques that you can use to get more speaking practice.
Okay, sounds good.
One of the best ways to practice speaking is to find a native speaker to talk to.
Yeah, that's ideal if you can do it.
And luckily, there are a lot of resources available online that can help you to connect with native speakers.
Like what?
Well, there are websites like italki and Cambly where you can find online tutors and conversation partners.
And you can usually find someone who fits your budget and your schedule.
Exactly. And it's a really convenient way to get regular speaking practice.
And the great thing about talking to a native speaker is that they can give you feedback on your pronunciation and your grammar.
Absolutely. And they can also help you to learn new vocabulary and idioms.
And they can also introduce you to different cultural perspectives, which is always interesting.
So if you're serious about improving your spoken English, I highly recommend finding a native speaker to practice with.
Now, what if you can't find a native speaker to practice with?
Well, another option is to find a language partner.
Someone who's also learning English.
Exactly. And you can practice with each other.
So you can both benefit.
Yeah. And it can be more affordable than hiring a tutor.
And it can also be more fun because you can learn from each other and motivate each other.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of websites and apps that can help you to find a language partner.
Like HelloTalk, for example.
Yeah, HelloTalk is a great one, and there are others as well.
So even if you don't have a native speaker to practice with, you could still find someone to talk to.
Exactly. And any speaking practice is better than no speaking practice.
And speaking of speaking practice, there's another technique that I want to mention that often gets overlooked.
What's that?
Talking to yourself.
Talking to yourself.
Yeah, it sounds a little strange, but it can actually be really helpful.
How so?
Well, when you talk to yourself, you don't have to worry about making mistakes or feeling self-conscious.
That's true.
So you can just relax and practice speaking freely.
And you can practice any situation you want.
Exactly. You can practice ordering food at a restaurant. You can practice giving a presentation. You can practice having a conversation with a friend.
And you can do it anywhere.
In the shower. On your way to work, at the gym.
So don't underestimate the power of talking to yourself.
It's a great way to get extra speaking practice and to build your confidence.
Okay, so we've talked about finding a native speaker to talk to, finding a language partner, talking to yourself. Are there any other ways to get more speaking practice?
Yeah, there are lots of other ways. One thing you can do is join an English-speaking group.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
So this could be a group that meets in person or a group that meets online.
And they're groups for all sorts of interests.
Exactly. So you can find a group that's focused on something that you're passionate about.
And it's a great way to meet new people and make friends.
And of course, it's a great way to practice your spoken English.
So don't be afraid to put yourself out there and join a group.
You might be surprised at how much you enjoy it.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different ways to get more speaking practice, but now I want to talk about a specific technique that can help you to improve your pronunciation and your fluency.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's called shadowing.
Shadowing.
Yeah, have you ever heard of it?
I have, actually. It's where you listen to a native speaker and then you try to repeat exactly what they say.
Right, and you do it as closely as possible.
So you're mimicking their pronunciation, their intonation, their rhythm.
Exactly, and it's a really effective way to improve your own speaking skills.
So how do you actually do it?
Well, first you need to find some audio or video material that you want to shadow.
So this could be a podcast, a TED Talk, a YouTube video, anything like that.
Right, and then you just listen to a short segment of the material, maybe a sentence or two.
And then you pause it.
And you try to repeat what you just heard as accurately as possible.
And it's important to focus on all the details, the pronunciation, the intonation, the rhythm.
Yeah, you want to try to sound as much like the native speaker as possible.
And a good tip is to record yourself while you're shadowing.
Why is that?
Well, that way you can listen back to yourself and compare your pronunciation to the native speaker's pronunciation.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and it can help you to identify any areas where you need to improve.
So shadowing is a really simple but effective technique that you can use to improve your pronunciation and your fluency.
And it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's kind of like a game.
And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it.
All right, so we've talked about immersion, we've talked about speaking practice, we've talked about shadowing. Now I want to talk about something that I think is really important for becoming a more confident English speaker.
Okay, what's that?
It's the importance of focusing on practical communication.
Practical communication.
Yeah, so instead of trying to learn all the fancy vocabulary words and grammar rules, focus on learning the language that you're actually going to use in everyday situations.
So things like greetings, asking for directions, ordering food.
Exactly.
Things that you'll actually need to use in real life.
And the best way to learn this kind of language is to practice using it.
So how can you practice practical communication?
Well, one way is to role-play different situations.
So, for example, you could pretend that you're at a restaurant and you need to order food.
Or you could pretend that you're asking for directions.
Or you could pretend that you're checking into a hotel.
And you can do this with a friend or a language partner.
Or you can even do it by yourself.
Yeah, just imagine yourself in the situation and say the words out loud.
And the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
And the easier it will be to use this language in real life.
And there are also a lot of resources available online that can help you to learn practical English.
Like what?
Well, there are websites like Duolingo and Babbel that have lessons and exercises that focus on everyday situations.
And there are also apps like Fluently that use authentic video content to teach you real-world English.
So there are lots of options available to you.
So if you're serious about improving your spoken English, make sure to focus on learning and practicing practical communication.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
We've talked about immersion, we've talked about speaking practice, we've talked about shadowing, we've talked about practical communication.
And I think there's one more thing that we need to talk about.
What's that?
The fear of making mistakes.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
It's one of the biggest obstacles for English learners.
Because nobody wants to sound stupid.
Right. And it can prevent people from even trying to speak.
But the truth is, everyone makes mistakes when they're learning a new language.
It's part of the process.
And it's actually how we learn.
So don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Embrace them.
Yeah. View them as opportunities to learn.
And the more mistakes you make, the more you'll learn.
And the better you'll get at speaking English.
And remember, native speakers are usually very understanding.
Yeah, they're not going to judge you for making a mistake.
They're just happy that you're trying to communicate.
And in fact, they'll probably be impressed that you're learning their language.
So don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back.
Go out there and practice speaking English as much as you can.
And have fun with it.
Yes, because learning a new language should be enjoyable.
So to recap, we've talked about a lot of different techniques that can help you to improve your spoken English.
And we've emphasized the importance of immersion speaking practice, shadowing practical communication, and embracing mistakes.
And I think the most important thing is to be consistent.
Yeah, even if you can only practice for a few minutes each day, it will make a difference over time.
And don't give up.
Learning a new language takes time and effort.
But it's so rewarding.
So keep practicing and you'll get there.
And as you continue on your journey to spoken English fluency, here's something to think about. Think of a specific situation where you usually feel a little bit nervous or hesitant to speak English. Maybe it's ordering food at a restaurant or giving a presentation at work or talking to a stranger on the street. And think about how you could apply one of the techniques we talked about today to approach that situation differently. Maybe you could try shadowing a similar conversation beforehand, or you could practice some key phrases that you might need. Or you could simply remind yourself that it's okay to make mistakes.
Whatever you do, just remember to be confident and have fun.
And keep practicing.
Because the more you practice, the better you'll get.
And the more confident you'll become.
So keep up the great work, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.
Bye for now.